Good evening and welcome one and all to our session. Today I'm one of the digital imaging product specialists here at Sony Australia, and joined with me tonight is Heath.
How you doing, mate?
Yeah, good. Newly introduced camera within our family. Thankfully, we did put the question out there and ask all of you at home if you had any questions that you might like to share with us. And Heath and I got a bunch of questions. So thank you so much for submitting those in. And we're going to go through them tonight. We're going to go through all of those questions that came through. Of course, if you have any other questions throughout the session this evening, please put them up in the chat. We'll try our best to answer them. I do have a 7S III here with me tonight, so we can go through the menu settings and have a look at a few things as well. So if anything comes up that you'd like to check, just let us know and put it in the chat. Just a quick, brief word of caution, if I may. We will be talking pretty heavy tech stuff for some of this. So please come along for the journey, come along for the ride, and we'll try our best to make sense of as much of it as we can. So, we got plenty to get through, Heath, so maybe we just dive straight in. Let's start off with our first question here from Ralph. And so Ralph has said, can this camera do in-camera multi-exposures? If so, how many? And what other aspect ratio options are available? So, Heath?
Okay, so straight away, I can say that it won't do multiple exposure for one image. If that's what Ralph was getting at, as in like laying one image on top of the other one. It can do bracketing, so you can shoot multiple frames at different exposures, as you can with a lot of other cameras. And the aspect ratios on the Alpha 7S III are the same as the Alpha 7R4 and Alpha 9 Mark II, which is 3x2, 4x3, 1x1 square, and 16x9. So yeah, I think that answers that question.
I think you've done it perfectly. And so, yeah, just to clarify once again, with the multi-exposure, say like the R series of cameras, they are capable of the pixel shift multi-shoot, which in essence is a little bit of multi-exposure, so to speak. What we're doing is we're shifting the sensor one pixel to the side to collect more color information. But the 7S III does not have that feature. That's specific to the R lineup of cameras. We've got the camera here, so how about I just quickly show you in the menu where that goes. So what we have in our newly layout design is the menu tabs. They do run down the left-hand side, and then we go to the right. And as we navigate down the right-hand side, we then go through and find more of our options. So in image quality, if we then go down, we do have the option there for aspect ratio. When we select that, then we have our four options that Heath just said: the 3x2, 4x3, 16x9, and the 1x1 ratio. So that answers all of those ones. Let's dive straight into the next one, which is from Eric. And Eric says, in what way does the Alpha 7S III stand out against its competitors? Now, Eric, that's a but what we've done, we've tried our best to put together a bit of a document, so to speak, that helps to highlight some of these things. So I'll throw it up here and we can actually talk through this just a little bit and really highlight it. So we've broken this down into four sections or four components where we think it's the video recording options, the video recording quality, Sony's natural advantage, and as well as design and functionality. So I'll get us started with the video recording options. Well, first of all, the Alpha 7S Mark III, I'm sure as perhaps you have seen, it does do 4K recording at 120 frames per second internal, and that's at the all-intra writing rate. So that way you are getting the best quality that you can possibly get in camera, as well as 4K 60 frames per second, and we have continuous video recording for over an hour on that. And another great option that we have with video recording is the choice of all intra or longer in all video formats. So if you want to manage those files a little bit better for editing, or you do want to get the most out of the camera for post-processing and post-editing, by all means, you have those options in all those modes.
Yeah, I think that's one of the areas where the 7S3 does stand out from the competition, is that no matter what frame rate or frame size you'd like to shoot at, the codecs are the same across the entire board. So you can shoot all intra from 4K 24 up to 120p, all internal.
Yeah.
And you can do the same thing with the H.265 files, long GOP. It doesn't matter whatever you want to choose. It's the same across the board. So if you are chopping and changing frame rates, you're not losing any quality by changing that frame rate. It's the same quality across the entire series of videos that you're shooting.
Yeah, yeah, and it is a big feature and something that does stand out, especially the 4K 120, having that as the maximum frame rate in camera. Yeah, really does help to line all those things together. Video recording quality. These are another couple of really great things about making a dedicated 4K video recording camera, is that with all that data that we have, well, there's no need to line skip or pixel bin. So we are retaining as much information from every pixel that we possibly can. There is no recording time limits. So the 2959 movie recording limit is gone in all formats. And then the 16-bit RAW video output via HDMI. That for us was always a massive thing, wasn't it, Heath? When we saw 16-bit RAW, I think that yeah, I mean, by comparison to the available cameras right now, 16-bit is huge. Yeah, it's very
huge. And just speaking about the RAW, I've just seen a question come through from Keith, who's saying, will the RAW output from HDMI something you have to pay extra for, or a firmware upgrade? And the answer to that's no, Keith. It's in the camera, ready to go. By the time the camera actually lands in stores, you should also be able to pick up an Atomos Ninja 5, which will be the only external recorder that's going to be able to take that 16-bit linear footage and record that into like a ProRes kind of format from there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the big thing that we've been looking at, Heath, was that the 16-bit linear, when it's processed in the Atomos recorder, at this stage looks like it's going to be brought down as a 12-bit ProRes RAW file. But I think the exciting thing is 16-bit gives you so much more headroom in future. When recorders have the capability of being able to receive more data and more information and be able to do this in RAW, we do have that headroom here with the 7S3 to really be able to capture as much of this as possible. Yeah, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
If we're moving through this, there is the improved color management, which is designed to better match the S-Cinetone color science, which is the same filters you'll see on the FX9 cinema cameras as well as the Venice. I think the 7S3 was really built to really consider and think about how it fits within the family. For many people, I think the 7S3 will be much of a maybe an A cam, but in instances where you have potentially an FX9 or a Venice camera on set, you can now use this as a B cam because it slots into the workflow so much easier.
Yeah, and obviously the Alpha 7S3 doesn't have S-Cinetone, but the colors have been designed to match pretty closely. And I think if you were to cut the footage together, moving past in a timeline, you won't notice it as obviously as if you were to try and cut something from a previous generation Alpha camera. And that's why the colors have been tweaked the way they have been, is to match those more cinematic cameras like the FX9 and the Venice.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And 15 stops dynamic range in S-Log 3. We'll explore that a little bit more a little bit later tonight as well. But again, a massive benefit for the 7S3. When we jump over to design and functionality, something which has been a bit of a headline of the last 4 or 5 weeks has been all about heat management for these cameras, which are processing enormous amounts of data. And like, we can't understate that enough, is that what is in market right now, these cameras, they are incredible. They are processing an enormous amount of data, and that is going to generate a lot of heat. And one of the best things about the 7S3 with this new design is that there is what we call Sigma, and that's just in the Greek alphabet. It's using the same shape as the Sigma is. And this design helps to dissipate heat much more effectively within the camera. So it's a passive cooling system. No need for fans or anything like that. Once again, keep the noise on set as low as possible. the all-new CF Express Type A cards, memory cards. So when we launched this camera, we also launched an entirely new media, which is the CF Express Type A card. A bit of a mouthful it can be.
Yeah.
But really exciting here is that Heath, I mean, the 7S3 has dual media card slots with dual function. Like you can accommodate one way or the other, right?
It's something that Sony's done in the past. Anyone who's old enough to remember memory sticks, on some of the, they had memory stick and SD in the one slot, and obviously now they've taken the same sort of approach by using the CF Express Type A card in the same slot as the SD card. And I'm not sure if we can show that at the moment, but basically you've got the two slots and the cards will only go in their own respective part of that one slot. So there's no way to accidentally jam the wrong card in the wrong space. The CF Express Type A is narrower and a bit thicker, and it just goes straight in. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I think what also comes with that, we haven't listed it here on this list, but the ability to hot swap between those slots. You can continuously record from slot 1, and let's say the media fills up on that, well, it'll relay record directly to slot 2, allowing you to take the media out of slot 1, put a fresh one in, and then you can just keep going. You can keep rolling on like that. So big advantage. And that kind of is similar to that next dot point there where it says ability to record internal and external video simultaneously. So if you do have like an Atomos recorder and you do have a CF Express Type A card inside the camera, you can record to both. So you do have a backup copy.
Yeah.
The ability to name files in camera. So file management becomes a much easier. And trust me, I've worked on enough sort of sets to know how valuable that is to be able to name files, get it to ingest it. And just being able to folder all of those away on the computer is so much easier if you can just name them. So a great
it's really one of those things. If you are someone who's got multiple jobs on one day, if you're going from one location to another, you can name your files by your different locations or your different jobs that you're doing. It means getting home at the end of the day when you're unloading those cards, it makes so much more sense knowing what files go for what job.
You won't just
absolutely. Be stuck with C0001 and there's multiples of that.
Yeah, or even like you just had me thinking like a wedding videographer or something like that, where the day is kind of distinctly broken into 2 or 3 components. As you set up for that part of the night, you can just easily name those files, ingest them in, and then when it comes to editing that video together, that workflow is just so much nicer. So it's a nice little touch, but something that makes a big difference to the workflow of how you use this camera. So that we can also display up to 3 screens via the Imaging Edge app simultaneously. And that's another huge thing I personally think is crazy. So what we've got is we have the ability to use the LCD screen on the back of the camera. We can HDMI out to an external monitor, but then we can also, via Wi-Fi, connect the 7S3 to a tablet or a smartphone, and via the Imaging Edge app, you've essentially got a third display. Again, huge practical advantages of being able to do that.
Yeah, and you can also, if I'm not wrong, also pull focus from the Imaging Edge app.
Yes, you can.
So you can actually be sitting on the couch, just changing your focus without having to touch the camera at all. Absolutely. While somebody else is watching on another monitor somewhere else. So
absolutely, and I gave it a bit of a try today. It's not only just being able to pull focus, but you can also, if you set the 7S3 into touch tracking on the touch menu setting, then in the app you can actually activate touch tracking, so that way it will track as well as pull focus. So you have those 2 functions, which is incredible. And that firmware update came out for the app like 2 or 3 days ago, I think we saw. So it was really recent. It happened automatically for anyone who already has the Imaging Edge app. And then the last box we've got there, just the Sony Advantage. Well, of course, we have our E-mount lens system. We now have 56 lenses, I'm going to say. I think that's pretty good. 56 E-mount lenses across the APS-C and full-frame lineup, which are interchangeable between those two. So a massive lens lineup, which is readily available. And, of course, the other Sony Advantage is real-time tracking autofocus and eye autofocus, which we've seen is documented as to be pretty legendary over the last year or so.
Yeah. I'm just saying
That wraps up that question.
one more thing, Nick, before you move on. Our friend Felicia just wants to know about how much delay is there between touching the screen and the camera pulling focus.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Felicia. Thanks for the question. Look, we do have another question that we're going to explore a little bit later, and I'll try my best to show it to you. Generally speaking, though, it's probably well, actually, you can change the speed of the expression for the autofocusing camera. So at the moment, it is just set on the mid speed with mid responsiveness. So probably at this stage, maybe takes half a second to a second, just depending on the depth that I want to change focus between. But you can change that responsiveness in camera. You can change it right up to 7 for incredibly responsive, or 1, which will give you a really, really, really slow transition if you're trying to create a bit of atmosphere or a bit of a mood in the shot. So, but yeah, that's all controlled in that autofocus settings in the camera. Cool. All right. Well, how about we move on to
next question. That was a big question, that one.
Yes, it was a big one. I think it crossed off a lot, though. A lot of maybe people were thinking about, or sort of had sort of been thinking, and wanted to share. So we do have one from Coral, who said, "How would you compare this camera to the Sony Alpha 9?" Heath?
Okay. For me, they're two different real-world use sets. Yeah. Obviously, the Alpha 9 and the 9 Mark II primarily based around speed of acquisition, speed of autofocus, speed of capture. So they're great for sports and news journalism. The price point that the Alpha 9's at right now is really good for also events and wedding photographers. Whereas obviously the Alpha 7S III, everyone's seen with the launch, it's based a lot around video. However, it does have 10 frames a second, really good low light performance. And even though it just has a 12 megapixel sensor, it's still really good for capturing things that are happening around you, even if they are at speed, but the different world uses really for me. So I'd say it holds up in some regards. Obviously, it's a lot better for professional video use with all the video centric features that it does have. But then the 9 series cameras having the 24 megapixel sensor and the 20 frames a second blackout free shooting, that's a different kind of camera altogether. But it'd be nice to have both in your kit, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no arguing. I think you sort of hit the nail on the head. I think between the Alpha 9 and the Alpha 7S Mark III, I mean, there are by nature things that both those cameras share. Like you were mentioning, that autofocus, the real-time tracking, those functions, battery life, these types of things are actually kind of common between the two. But really where they stand apart comes in their specific user case. And for me, the 7S III, there is such a huge application for this camera toward being used for video function and video purpose, which just was not a function or the purpose of the Alpha 9. The Alpha 9 doesn't come with picture profiles. It doesn't come with S-Log. It's not a HLG, whereas the 7S III does have those functions, of course. So I think those two.
That leads towards more of that news gathering sort of environment. Most people who are shooting news don't do a lot of post-production on their images or their video. It's about getting the content out to the public as fast as possible. So they don't need to do that that setting. Yeah.
So I think if I can put it as maybe as simply as this, I would say that if 80% of your time or more is spent shooting stills, and that could be wildlife or it could be sports-based stills, if 80% or more is stills-based photography, I would say probably you're leaning into an Alpha 9 camp. And then the other side of that pendulum is if 80% of more of your time is spent shooting videos, then I think you're going to really enjoy the benefits of the 7S III. If it can be put as simply as that, then that's how I put those ones down.
Yeah. All right. Next question. Just let everyone know, we can see a whole bunch of questions coming through. Some of them are ones that we've got already coming up that were already being asked. So
absolutely.
we're not ignoring all the questions. We're trying to get to all of them, but we're also trying to get to the ones that were asked in beforehand. So we'll just get through those ones first.
Exactly. Yeah, and a lot of, as you're saying, Heath, a lot of these we should be crossing off, which is great. We should be able to answer everyone's thoughts and questions here. So we'll jump into the next one, which is from Ben. Ben says, for shooting sports in low light, will 12 megapixels be enough for printing in magazines? I know the Alpha 7S is used for astrophotography and publishing in magazines, but how would sports go as well, I assume?
Okay. I'll just answer this one real quick. So about 10 years ago, maybe a few more, I'm getting a lot older, used to shoot on-set stills for film and TV with a 12 megapixel pro body, camera, and quite easily enough real estate there to cover a 2-page spread, even with a little bit of cropping. So 12 megapixels is more than enough. It was the normal size for a long time, like I said, 10 years ago. So I wouldn't be worried at all about that. And with the 10 frames a second and the autofocus with real-time tracking, you can definitely shoot some amazing stills and sports, especially in low light, with the 7S III. But as we just said in the previous question, cameras more like the Alpha 9 and the 9 Mark II have more of a professional sports base setting to them. It's just that the 7S III is obviously, like we said before, video first and stills second. But I would have no problem at all shooting that camera for sports at all. You're just not going to be able to have the real estate to be able to crop in like you can with the 24 megapixel sensors or the 61 like you can with the 7R4.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think that also in the camp for the 7S III, when it comes to stills-based photography, it still can shoot 10 frames per second. So that it is quick. But also because of the improved image processor and because of the improved image sensor, it can fire off over 1,000 uncompressed RAWs in a single burst. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's a 12 megapixel sensor. But nevertheless, you can just hold the shutter button down and the camera will just keep firing off shots. So it's no slouch when it comes to stills photography for what it is and for what it does. Yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's just keep moving on and we'll jump into this next question from Chris. Chris says, I do 95% of my shooting with S Cinetone as there is little time for grading and it looks so good out of the camera. Is it going to be easy to set the Alpha 7S III up to match the FX9's look?
Okay, I think we talked about this before as well. So the color science in the 7S III has been upgraded from the previous Alpha cameras to closer match with the FX9 and to some point the Venice. So I would have no problem at all cutting the FX9 footage and the Venice together in the one timeline. Like we said, as the files, as those that content is moving across the screen, you're not going to see it. If you put the two images side by side, you probably can tell. But in a real world use of watching a movie or a documentary, or whatever it might be, I don't think anyone that's watching that footage is going to see the difference.
Yeah, I agree. And, as we sort of touched on from the top, the camera was designed to be built as a part of this ecosystem of cameras from the Venice, the FX9, and now the Alpha 7S Mark III. They are designed to be part of the same family. And of course, there's going to be a natural stepping stone as you go up through that cinema lineup. But nevertheless, having the same fundamental color science at heart just makes that matching them so much easier. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
All right. As we are moving on, we've got another one here from Keith. And Keith says, does it crop to APS-C sensor size in the same way my Alpha 7 III does? So I can use E-mount crop lenses. Is the 12 megapixels enough? And can I record 4K in that format?
Okay. This is probably the question I've seen about 8 times already in the chat. So I know everyone's keen to know the answer.
Yeah, great.
If you put an APS-C lens on the Alpha 7S III, it will crop into Super 35, but that will be at full HD, so 1920 by 1080. Obviously, the sensor is already 4K, and when you crop down, you're going to not be able to shoot 4K anymore. You're going to get full HD, but it's going to be super sampled down from a 2K down to that 1080p image. So it's going to be a very good looking full HD, but it's going to be Super 35. So for anyone who's used to shooting in the Super 35 field of view with APS-C lenses, you'll be more than happy with what you're getting. But it doesn't do 4K that frame size, unfortunately.
Yeah. That wraps that up pretty neat.
We do have there's a lot of people asking that. So yeah,
and we've got an expanded version of that question that we're also going to explore a little bit later. And we'll dive into that, but that sums all of that up really nicely. So moving on, Hugo has asked us, is it possible to record 4K 120p 10-bit 422 with Sony V60 card, or is the V90 required for 4K 120p? How is the weather seal on the Alpha 7S III? Can I use it without having to worry in snow? Let's answer the first part of this first. So we've just done a really simple sort of graph or a chart here just to sort of help highlight which of the required media on the far right-hand side here is needed depending on your recording format, codec, bitrate, and these things. So if we look at the first two options, which is the XAVC-S recording format, we can see that that format prioritizes long GOP. Even though we are recording it in the 10-bit 422 color sampling space, V60 cards is actually totally fine. So V60, you can do 4K 120, or here for our region, it's 100 frames per second. So that's why we've got 100p there. But yeah, when we are shooting long GOP or in that XAVC-S recording format, V60 is going to be totally fine, and you can get the benefits of the 4K 120 or 100 frames and the 4K 60-50 frames. The only reason to get those faster cards is when you change that to all intra. And all intra is essentially every frame retains its own bit of information, opposed to grouping similar frames together to compress that data, which just means the camera doesn't work too hard at processing it, and that's effectively long GOP. So all intra, each frame retains its own piece of information. There's a huge volume of data, and that's why we need these faster cards. So when we look at the new recording format that the Alpha 7S III has, is the XAVC-I, which is the first time we've seen this in an Alpha camera body. And yes, it still shoots in H.264 codec. But yeah, the big change there is that it is shooting all I, and we do need V90 memory cards for doing 4K 50-60 frames per second. But if you do want to get 4K 120 or 100 frames per second in that all intra, then yes, that's when you have to go up to the CF Express Type A card. You just need those.
And to get the 4K 100, 120p XAVC-I, which is all intra, you'll also be doing that in the S&Q mode. So you won't get any audio. But when you do bring that footage into your NLE, you can retime that as well. So it's not stuck being super slow-mo. You can speed it back up. It just won't have any audio with it. The only other option then is to shoot like shown with the XAVC-S, 100, 120p. You will get audio in those frame rates as well.
Yeah, perfect. So the second half of the question.
Go back to that screen for 1 sec. Sorry, Nick.
Can do.
If anybody wants to, once the screen pops back up there, just take a quick screenshot of that. If you can't remember all the details and you're not sure and you want to think about what we're saying, feel free to take a screenshot, and then you got it to look at later today or tomorrow. Okay.
I'll leave it up for now. So we can talk about the other half of the question was weather sealing and how does it work? And then the follow-up with that is what it would be like in snow-like conditions. So the weather sealing, it is the same sort of weather sealing that we've seen come out with the Alpha 7R Mark IV and the 9 Mark II. So it is improved sealing around the doors for the media as well as for the inputs and outputs for the camera. So those have all had a massive overhaul.
Yeah, there was also more improved weather sealing around the battery door as well. So
Yes.
if you were to put the camera down onto a damper surface, there'd be less chance of water ingress via the bottom. That was an update, like we said, for the 7R for the Alpha 9 Mark II, and now the Alpha 7S3 has got that upgrade as well.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to snow, it's a bit hard to really put any sort of metric against that. I think that the real challenge with snow is just the cold and the temperature, and ideally, the cameras to perform their best, they're not in sub-zero temperatures because they just get too cold, and the computing parts just won't be able to function. So
you're going to suffer more from battery drain if it's that cold. But
exactly.
part of the worldwide launch video that everyone would have seen, we had there was people inside glaciers shooting the camera in there. So they can be used in the cold, but just like any electronic device, it's use your best judgment and don't go doing anything that you wouldn't want to take the risk of, really. So we won't recommend anybody use the camera in an unsafe environment. So
yeah. Perfect. All right, so let me just see where we were up to. Yes, okay. So we've got our next question here from John. It is. John says, will the Alpha 7S Mark III fire flash with all bracketed exposures, or will putting a flash on it override the bracket feature? So I tested this, and what I found is that the camera will still continue to do the bracket even if there is a flash. The flash will not override. I did have the flash set up to TTL, so it was getting a lot of the information from the camera itself. But my experiment had the bracketing exposure. It was 3 frames, and it was 2 stops over and 2 stops under. But absolutely, it will still keep that information, and it will still bracket those for you. Of course, the flash does a great job at making sure there is enough light in the scene. But yes, the bracketing feature will still continue to work. Yep.
Cool. Good to have some questions that are a bit different too.
Yeah. Moving right into the next one, Luke has asked, just wondering if the Alpha 7S Mark III has the ability to close the shutter in bulb mode by touching the rear LCD screen. Would be nice to be able to do it without requiring a remote. So there is a way to do it. Unfortunately, the 7S Mark III does not have a shutter function by touching the LCD screen, but you can control this through the Imaging Edge app. So I've got it set up in such a way. So we'll give this a try and see if we can demonstrate how this works. This is the first time we've used this switchboard in this way, so we'll find out. Yeah, fingers crossed here. So what we've got, this is the Alpha 7S Mark III menu, and the first thing I need to do is make sure that I can connect a smartphone to it. So by doing that, I go to Control with Smartphone, and I want to turn this function on. And once that's on, if you haven't paired with the camera already, by pressing the connection, what it'll do is it will create this Wi-Fi standby, and then there's the QR code to scan. So I have already done this before. So Heath, how does that look? Does that look okay? Can you sort of see the phone a bit?
Maybe make me small so then we can make the screen bigger.
Oh, okay, yeah. All right, give me 1 second. Right. So this is now the Imaging Edge app. I'm just going to hide this one down here. And we can see that I've already paired with it. So if the camera should still have its connection working, it's asking to join. Okay. Just got to jump back over to the camera and make sure the Wi-Fi connection still wants to work. Oop, I'll just go back there, and then down into smartphone, control with smartphone on, and then connection. And now we've connected over to the app. And in the app, what we can do where it says bulb is actually where we have control for our shutter. And so that way we can change our shutter speed up and down as needed. But in the app as well, now we have the bulb function. And if I was to slide that to the left, just seems like it's loading there. Oh, I think I know what it might be. I think I might have to put a lens on the camera. Hang on one second.
Oh, that would help.
That'll do it. That'll do it. All right. Pop a lens on. There we go. So now if I move back over to here, we can see there it is, and that we can control our shutter speed in through here as we change it up and down. So if we then change that right down to bulb mode, we can then hold that across, and now the camera is taking a shot as per bulb mode. And then you can turn it off, and the camera has taken the shot. So it can be done by using the Imaging Edge app to be able to get that one to work. Yeah.
Cool.
I think that wraps up.
Probably a bit more seamless when you're not trying to have the camera connected to the stream while filming and your phone all at the same time as well.
There's a lot of things going on here, but yeah. Absolutely. It's definitely achievable, and I'm sure when you're not having a multi-camera setup, it's much easier. We'll move on to the next question here from Lloyd. Lloyd has asked, how does its video quality compare in full frame to APS-C? And so this is where we're just going to expand a little bit more on what we spoke about, in particular with the clear image zoom function, especially in APS-C. The character cutoff, unfortunately for the question, rolled over. So it says, what sort of result does that produce? For example, does it reduce the quality to HD or similar? So does it go below full HD quality when you are recording using clear zoom in full HD using a crop lens? So if we combine all those things together, what's actually happening? So here's a basic little chart just to help sort of explain it. And this goes to what you were saying earlier, Heath, about the camera's ability to actually oversample from the size and bring more information in, which, in generally speaking, is fantastic. So what we've got is the sensor size, so the actual physical sensor size of the camera. And then if we were outputting raw 4K raw recording to like the Atomos Ninja 5, we're putting out 4264 by 2408 pixels, essentially. And that is then giving us, if we want to do 4K video recording internal, we're getting oversampled because we're recording from a larger sample space. Same sort of principle happens when we go to full HD recording. What we output is 1920 by 1080, but we're sampling essentially a 2K size on the sensor. So if we switch into clear image zoom whilst in using a crop lens, for example, what happens is that we're not cutting into our full HD video recording size. We're just dipping into the sampling size for full HD. So the camera, even if you have 2 times clear image zoom recording on a crop lens, you will not go, your video quality is never going to go lower than what you've chosen in camera because it's sampling from a little bit of a larger space. Yeah, bit of a complicated one, but I think that sort of explains it.
I think the image helps you understand how you get to that point, though. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, just to sum that up, is that when we want full HD video recording, we're actually sampling from a larger area on the sensor, which means we have more data. And if we choose to do a clear image zoom or something, we're not cutting into the recording resolution that we've chosen. We're cutting into our oversampled area. So yeah, we never lose that in the end. We've still always got it. All right, that was a good question though. So let's move into the next one. is a question here from Mark. And Mark has said, is it true that the Alpha 7S Mark III has 2 sweet spots for ISO? I heard that ISO 200 and ISO 1600 are the best, especially in low light. If you go either side of the 1600, it becomes grainy and unusable.
Okay. He was also saying 16,000, not 1600. So,
oh, yeah. Yes,
not used
of
to talking about ISO ranges that high, though. So that's not something that we've been made aware of officially. Obviously, we've seen people and we've tested the camera ourselves. We've seen that does happen, but it only happens in S-Log3. So if you're just shooting standard picture like no picture profile, just picture mode standard, you're going to be like getting to around ISO 1600 before you start seeing some noise introduced, and that's just the standard way that the camera does work. Obviously, shooting an S-Log, if you do get to 16,000, it does appear to, like, from our testing as well, that it looks pretty good. So I'm not going to complain about that, the fact that it does have that, but it's not a dual gain camera or anything like that. It's just the way that the cameras are working. So yeah, but to get that, you do need to be in S-Log.
Yeah, and I think everything you've touched on is true. It seems to be a bit of a strange anomaly that has been pretty reasonably well documented. But yeah, no complaints from us.
No.
But the official statement here is that it is not a dual gain or a dual ISO camera. It just seems to be a pretty good anomaly.
Yeah.
So Arthur has asked us, what's the maximum safe print size this can handle for still photography? This, I would say, is 12 megapixel sensor.
Yeah. And I'd be happy to print a 20 by 30 inch print. I'll offer a 12 megapixel sensor. You'd probably print at that size at around 200 DPI, which to the eye you're not going to see the difference at a normal viewing distance at that point anyway. If you're going to pixel peep, maybe you'll see that it's not holding up as well as obviously a 24 megapixel camera would at the same print size. But I would have no issue printing a 20 by 30 inch print from a 12 megapixel camera, no worries.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, me too. And I think you touched on it for sure in that is that, I think it really comes down to the condition and the environment that you took the photo in. If you've really kind of pushed the camera and you've pushed it up to that, 16,000 or 32,000 ISO range, maybe there's probably going to be a bit of noise start to be introduced in areas that you just can't quite recover. So yeah, I think it comes down to a couple factors, but absolutely, I'd be happy to print it in that same sort of size as well. Yeah,
I mean, obviously, like you were saying, a lot of things go into that, like even just the printing media, what you're printing on.
Yeah, true.
Worst case scenario, if it's a bit too noisy, just make it black and white. It'll look awesome.
Yeah, true. I've saved many a bad photo of my own by just turning it to black.
Yeah.
So Thomas has asked us, hi there, do we have an exact date or week that they will land in New Zealand? How does one become a Sony ambassador for video-related work? We'll answer the first part of that one first. That's the best way to do these order of things, is first one's first. So exact date, unfortunately, we don't have an exact date, but we are looking at very early October, and that's for Australia as well as New Zealand. So we're looking at, first
to second week of October would be a good place to be thinking, but obviously with the way things are going at the moment, there's a lot of shipping delays and stuff like that, but early October is the official word.
Absolutely. And about becoming a Sony ambassador for video-related work. Well, first of all, thanks for expressing the interest. Of course, we love to hear that, and we love to hear all of our Sony users out there. What we do have is we have a platform called Sony Scene, and Sony Scene is a workshop platform where Sony digital imaging ambassadors and advocates run events, and they give back to their community and educate within the wider photographic and video community. So I'd say a great step if you're interested in becoming an advocate is certainly to check out Sony Scene and really see what the advocates do and see if that's something that that lines up with how you think you could help out, of course. And by all means, we do have things like the Alpha Awards, and next year, excitingly, we have our very first Alpha Film Festival coming up, which I'm sure the 7S3 will be perfect for that type of content. So yeah, by all means, like really engage, put your content out there, let us see what you can do. And yeah, generally speaking, I mean, given this year and the sort of COVID situation, we generally do take a new intake of advocates annually, so to speak. But yeah, this year's been a bit trickier. So we'll just sort of play by ear, but there's always plenty of communication out there when it comes to that sort of stuff. And yeah, by all means, we love to see people out there shooting and using the gear. So yeah, keep in contact for sure.
Cool. And we've just got one question in the chat. I'll just jump on while we're here, Nick, from Alistair, asking, he says that, how does it handle the pointy end? He's running his A7S2 at 102,400 and been able to use it in a finished project. Does the Alpha 7S3 go as well? Yes, is the question, is the answer to the question. The high ISO in the Alpha 7S3 is actually improved from the 7S2. So if you're comfortable shooting at 102,400 on the 7S2, then you'll be more than happy doing the same thing with the Alpha 7S3 as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And two thumbs up from me. Yeah, I think the big thing about it is that with the 7S3, we've put in a whole new image sensor, which is entirely new for the 7S lineup. And we've paired that with an entirely new image processor that we haven't used before, which is our XR image processor. With these two things running in tandem, they're able to reduce the noise and really be able to bump that ISO up and just keep such great detail, even in shadowed areas.
And do it with the all intra format as well. So you're getting not just better looking, but also better quality content as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I took the camera out the other day and I had it at 32,000 ISO. It was the middle of the day, 32,000 ISO. Had it at f22, and the shutter speed was something unforgivable. And everything was fine. All those shadows and highlights were just preserved. So big advocate. I think it will work. Yeah, really well. All right, I'm just going to go back up. So, here we go. So back up here to Brent. Brent has asked, how well does the video autofocus work with the 600mm prime lens? Is it worth getting an Alpha 7S Mark III for video, or should I just use the Alpha 7R Mark IV or the Alpha 9 Mark II? Well, first of all, the 600mm prime lens, it's about as it's the Rolls Royce of our entire lineup of lenses. I mean, it's got everything you could possibly want. But the important thing here is that it does use our XD linear motors. These are the extreme dynamic linear motors. They're the fastest autofocus motor we've ever made and put into any of our lenses. And the 600mm has 4 of them. So, I think that from a lens perspective, the autofocus on that is always going to be incredibly fast. And then when we look at it from the 7S3 perspective, as we were just talking about, that image processor, it's actually a 30% boost on processing speed for autofocus and the AI recognition in the camera. So autofocus performance is exceptional across the board. And yeah, I think if you were to take the 7S3 and then pair it with a lens like this, you couldn't fault it.
Yeah. And I think if you're going to compare then to the Alpha 9 Mark II and the Alpha 7R4 for video only, the Alpha 9 Mark II doesn't have obviously the picture profiles and all that sort of thing that the 7S and the Alpha 7R4 have. But the Alpha 7S3 also has no line skipping, no pixel binning, no cropping. It's going to be a much better video camera than the Alpha 7R4 is if you're pairing it with that lens. That's what I feel. If you're shooting for stills and you're shooting, for wildlife or something like that with that lens, which is it's really good for. Then the 9 Mark II or the 7R4 would probably be standout cameras for those genres, but for video only, that's why the Alpha 7S III has been designed the way it has been. So I would go for that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think how they perform when compared to the 7S III and the 7R Mark IV, there's some really distinct differences. And then really with the 7S III versus the 7R4 for video, I mean, the 7R4, for all intensive purposes, can do a pretty great job, especially if you put it into Super 35 crop mode. The 7R4 is fantastic. I think, for my mind, the difference there is, if you want to go that extra step and you want to color grade your footage, you want to spend a bit of time manipulating it, editing it in post-production, then the 10-bit 422, as well as being able to shoot RAW, the reasonably more comfortable file sizes, so to speak, with the 7S III, all of those things really lean more towards that camera. But particularly, as we've seen tonight, the 10-bit 422 or 16-bit via external recorder, this extra color range and color space you're going to get, if you do want to color grade or anything in post-production, it's going to make a massive difference. Yeah. So, I think it's just a case of, yes, I'm going to spend a fair bit of time color grading and editing, then absolutely the 7S III, you're going to get every benefit and more by using that camera. If you just want to shoot some footage and cut that together and deliver that, maybe the 7R4 is probably going to get covered. That's my feeling on that. So next question here from John. John has asked, just wondering if the 15 stops dynamic range is applicable to stills shooting too. I know it is the same sensor, but it's only talked about for video shooting, so just wondering. Good question. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, the 15 stops dynamic range is across stills as well. We had 15 stops dynamic range stills from the 7.3, the Alpha 7.3. So it's been around for a little while now.
It's actually easier to get. It's actually easier to get more dynamic range in one frame than it is across an entire 24 or 25 frames per second. Absolutely. So I think Nick's going to help show some of that sort of stuff now. But for stills,
exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really key point there, Heath. Like you're saying, is that to achieve 15 stops dynamic range on a single shot, that sort of processing power or that data consumption by the camera is really manageable. But if you want to do that at 20 frames per second, 25, 50, 100, 240 frames per second, then we really are starting to push what the camera can do. So let's just take a really brief moment to sort of understand the dynamic range. The chart on the left here kind of just highlights it really, really easily for us. Essentially, as we go up, we are differentiating how much light the camera can discern between white and true blacks. So 15 stops. Of course, this graph is just for illustrative purposes only. But by the time we get to 15 stops, we can really start to creep in, and that's what's giving us a much greater dynamic range opposed to 12 or 10, where there's still a fair bit of light that's starting to creep into it. So why is this so important? Is it goes to the graph that we have on the right-hand side here, and this differentiates our S-log2 and our S-log3 across the dynamic range scale. So when we're looking at S-log3, because the Alpha 7S Mark III, it is a camera which achieves 15 plus stops of dynamic range. I'm just going to try to zoom in here a little bit and see if we can't sort of isolate this a little better. So as we're looking at S-log3, there's a couple key things that we're sort of seeing here as it crosses over in the graph. So for us, this middle bar is what we would call middle gray. And that's sort of the midway point when we're talking about our lightness exposure. So from 0 to 15, where does middle gray sit? It doesn't actually sit in the middle here because that's not quite middle gray. So 8 is not typically, in this example, wouldn't actually be our middle gray. It would actually probably be somewhere down like 4 or 5. But this is all just for illustrative purposes. So when we look at the S-log3 chart and where it crosses over between the shadows and into the whites. What we're doing is we're seeing how high up into the whites does it go before it maxes, as well as down into the grays. And we're getting about -7 into the shadows and the darks, which gives us fantastic contrast. But also we're getting right up to just about 8 in the whites and the highlights. And that's what's allowing us to expand into this full 15 stops of dynamic range when we're shooting on S-Log3.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out that that's 15 stops of captured dynamic range. Doesn't mean it's noise free. So obviously those 2 to 3 upper values maybe have quite a bit of noise. I wouldn't say that it's unusable. It may not be as pleasing. So it depends on if you're trying to output for a cinema release or for something you're going to be doing for short film or TV, something like that. Maybe you don't want to venture too high into that part for just aesthetic reasons. But if you just need to capture something and know that you've got the shot, you can go straight up there and you know you've got that dynamic range available to capture that information.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think I think that's exactly right. All right, well, we'll move on to the next question here from Lucy. And so Lucy has asked how to focus using the Shutter app. So for the 7S3, we will try once again to get a little demo going. Fingers crossed, but I think this should be okay. So it might just be we'll be focusing on a lot of nothing. But
while you're doing that, Nick, I might just quickly answer another question while you get yourself sorted. Jason's just asked, is AF usable across the full sensor, or is there a dead zone near the borders? I'll just jump on that real quick and say, no, there is. It's not full coverage. It doesn't extend all the way across the entire sensor, but it's not a very big area around the sides where it's actually missing autofocus. And as long as you're tracking with a subject and keeping it within the edges of the frame, what you call a safe area, then you should be fine. I don't think I've ever had any issue with that sort of thing. I know that when I did an eye autofocus test with the Alpha 7S3, I was dancing around all over the place like a crazy person. It tracked me the entire time. So if you're going way off the edge of the frame, you're going to be losing your subject as they go out anyway, unless you reframe the camera at that point. So I think that's the easiest way to explain that. Yeah. So
yeah, great.
Trying to get back. There we go.
Yeah. So let's give this a go, and we'll work through this together. So when we're looking at the 7S3 camera itself, when we're talking about how to do the autofocus on the app, at this point in time, the autofocus through the app is only supported in video mode for the 7S3. So we have to make sure that our mode dial has been switched over to movie mode and make sure that that is where it's at. Once we've done that, in our autofocus modes, we need to go to either option of continuous autofocus or the manual autofocus. Those are the 2 options that we have when we go into the app. So as we switch over here into the app, once we have, and we can see down in here, we have our selection also on app between autofocus and manual focus. When we have autofocus in, what we need to then make sure we have is, I should have checked this a moment ago on the camera, but just make sure that our touch focus is onto touch tracking. So down in touch operation, we've got touch operation on function. Let me just check this. Oh, no, it's not working for me. All right, I'll have to have a play with this, and then we'll come back to it. I had it working just a moment ago, so I'm going to have a little play with it, and we'll come back to this question. So maybe what I'll do, Heath, is I'll throw you onto this one from Matthew, which has the waveform histogram information been updated at all from previous Alpha 7 cameras? I'm so used to Premiere, RGB histogram, but even a singular histogram would be amazing.
Okay. All right. So the camera itself doesn't come with a waveform histogram or a vector scope or anything like that. It just has the standard sort of style histogram you can see on the left here. So I'm just going to stare at the screen so I know what I'm talking about. And as you can see, the left-hand side of that histogram is like the very dark part of the scene. The right-hand side is the very light part of the scene. If you compare that to what you see in Premiere on the left-hand side with your Lumetri scopes, that's showing the entire scene in one space. So anything that's bright will be up highest. Anything dark is down in the bottom. That's the shadows. So as a rudimentary way of exposing the camera using the histogram, you would try to keep your peaks from getting past where the light to very light area crosses over on the normal histogram. So the easiest way to do that, though, is to shoot in one of the log profiles. It's going to flatten your curve out, and that's going to help protect your highlights and your shadows. Obviously means that you do have a lot more work to do in post-production. So if you're used to working in Premiere or Final Cut, something like that, it's fine. You can shoot in log. You can then just put a technical LUT on, which will bring the footage back up to that Rec 709 look. You can also use the gamma assist function in the camera. So if you are shooting in a log profile by looking at having gamma assist turned on for that appropriate log profile, it's going to give you the look of what the footage is going to look like once you do that Rec 709 conversion in post-production. So shooting using a gray card or a color checker is the best way to get your settings right before you start filming. And I would say that using that in combination with the histogram should mean that you can get pretty good exposure across your job. But to answer the question, it doesn't have a waveform built in. No. That was a long way of answering it. Sorry.
That was a great answer. All right. How about we go back to this question? I think the problem I had was that I had the camera in the wrong shutter speed. I didn't have it fast enough. I had it still set at 1/4 of a second, but I've now bumped it up. So we should be fine. So we've still got the camera here, as we mentioned, shooting at 1/60th. And then when we go over and we look at it on the app, what we can see in the AFC mode is that if I touch, there is a little white screen or a white dot that is left behind when we touch the screen. And what that is doing is that is showing us where we're focusing to in the app. As we move over, we can see on the camera that the focus points are changing as we change between them. So when we select manual focus with this in those two modes, this gives us the function to focus pull. By touching the screen, we can focus pull between 2 points. It is when it is in the autofocus continuous mode where we can get real-time tracking and track the object. And we can see that the little icon with what looks like wings, I suppose, off to one side and the hand above the AWB is letting us know that we are doing tracking. So if I was to touch something, we can see that the white mark is indicating the area that I am tracking, and it will go from there. So that is how we are using the touch focus through the app, is through that. But the camera does need to be set into video mode, and you do have to have the shutter speed at an appropriate shutter speed, not at 1/4 of a second, like I was just trying to do. So we'll jump into the next question here from Natalia. It says, hi, Nick and Heath. Could you please convince me that Sony A7S Mark III is better than a Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra? Right now, I'm traveling most of the time and prefer a minimalist lifestyle, but I would love to make photography my major job in future, and for this reason, thinking to buy Sony Alpha 7S. Thank you. Can't wait for the live stream.
Okay.
Yeah, mouthful.
Yeah, okay. A lot to unpack in that one. So I think wanting to make photography a career and keep it minimalist, maybe either, start with an Alpha 7S camera. or you could go through one of our APS-C cameras, the Alpha 6100. It's a great entry level stills camera. Then the Alpha 6400 and 6600 cameras are also amazing for stills, but in a smaller, compact body style. And obviously they have APS-C lenses, which are smaller, more lightweight as well. But I'm never going to discourage somebody from wanting to go full frame straight out of the gate. So Alpha 7S Mark III would be great. As we've said before, though, primarily as a video camera. But with the 12 megapixel stills, it's almost the perfect size for shooting stills that are going to be uploaded directly to online. So it's really good for doing that as well. So I would always choose a camera over a dedicated camera over a mobile phone. Because I've dropped off my phone quite a few times, and if that's what I was using to make my money, then I'd be in a bit of trouble. And it's nice to have that separation of use your phone. It's fine for doing quick snapshots of receipts, which I use it for. But with the suite of cameras that Sony's got, with everything from the RX100 Mark VII, it fits into a pocket and still has great resolution and a perfect zoom range for travel. So there's a lot of cameras to choose from. So I would say that maybe after this stream, go online, check out the whole range of Sony cameras. But I would always recommend a camera over a phone. The RX100 Mark VII is probably one of my favorite small cameras. If you want something that's small, that's really good at video as well, then obviously the ZV-1, which I'm streaming with right now, that's great. So yeah, there's a lot to choose from.
Yeah, when I read this question, I think the first thing that jumped out to me was the RX100 Mark VII. I think for the most part, something to travel with, bit of a minimalist, I think were probably the key things that jumped out to me. And that's probably what caught me on the RX100 Mark VII. Of course, then the second half of loving to make a career out of photography, which is fantastic. Nothing more fulfilling, really. But I think it's hard to sort of find that happy spot. And Heath and I, we sort of spoke about it very briefly about the expectation that paying clients have, and a lot of the time in the corporate space, these clients expect that you're going to walk in and have something that looks the part, so to speak. And of course, if you were to walk in on a job with a smartphone, maybe that might have a different reaction than if you had something like the 7S III.
It's different if you're already a noted photographer and somebody who's already built a reputation, and then you want to do something different by using a smartphone. That's different too. But when you're trying to get new clients as a new photographer, I think that having the appropriate equipment to help you learn and progress and actually understand photography, that's something that you're going to get from using a dedicated camera, something like either the APS-C range or the full frame range of Sony cameras.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, we've got enough time for just a couple more questions. So we'll shoot up these last few that we've got here. So Paul has asked, I'd like to know what your 3 custom settings would be on the dial so you're ready to shoot for any run and gun situations. Cheers. This is a funny one, Paul. Yeah. Heath and I spoke about this.
We did. We talked about this and talked about how much that I shoot manual almost all the time, and I have custom function buttons set up, so I almost don't use the mode dial for the custom 1, 2, 3 there. But I know that Mark Gaylor, who I've done the Alpha Insights series with, and we talk quite a lot. He has his set up for action, landscape, and action, landscape, and portraits. So that's what he uses his mode dial for the 1, 2, 3 for those different settings that he uses for his photography. But with the Alpha 7S III having separated stills and movie menus, means that you don't run into those issues in the past where when you move from stills to movie mode, you're losing all your settings. So I think those custom dial options there are going to become a more personal thing for each person as they do their own work. So I can't really help with what I would do because I just leave them alone and just shoot manual and just keep turning dials because I'm old.
Yeah. And I'm exactly the same. Sorry, Paul. Yeah, I just shoot manual. I think I change maybe one or two of the custom preset buttons, but otherwise I just run and gun on manual mode. But absolutely, I think there's a great number of examples that we were talking about, Heath, where mode 1 might be your ideal landscape setup. Mode 2 could be for portraits, and then mode 3 could be astrophotography or any other of those variations where you actually might want to change a little bit to do with the color space. You might want to change, a lot of those are other little functions inside the cameras. So fortunately on these ones, Heath and I keep it pretty simple, but there is.
You could set them up and just have them as different shooting options for rather than having to go in and change just shutter speeds or something like that. You might have one set for indoor use, one set for outdoor, one set for when you do very high ISO stuff. It's just it's up to you to decide how best to make the camera work with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's another question we got in the chat, and I'll just jump on that one from Jason again, asking about removing the doors and the port covers.
Yeah.
I haven't tried to do that, Jason, so I don't know.
Yeah, look,
I don't think they come off as, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm having a quick look right now. It looks like the battery door is just the same, but the ones for the HDMI, they actually look like they're part of the housing. So I'm going to say it's
probably not recommended. I would think.
I don't think it would be recommended. And of course, for the weather sealing for the camera, those doors are enormously important to make sure that those ports keep any dust, dirt, sand, a bit of water residue to keep them out from those ports. So I definitely wouldn't be recommending taking them off at any rate. All right, Heath. Well, look, that was a big haul. It was just you and I talking for an hour and 11 minutes. I think that sums it up. If there's any final questions out there, please shoot them through right now. More just clearance for the K. I see.
From everything I've seen from some guys online who have shot using the Alpha 7R4 cage that was available, they all clear. And I think Small Rig is coming out with an Alpha 7S3 dedicated cage shortly, and the doors will all clear.
Yeah, great. And we'll just maybe finish on this last question here from Han, who says, for S-Log, I'm assuming you still need to overexpose 2 stops. I suppose it depends on which S-Log, varying between S-Log 2 or S-Log 3. If we're talking S-Log 3, in this instance, what I might do is I'll just quickly bring back up the graph from earlier. So with our graph, where you actually want to expose for S-Log 3 is this point where it hits over the 0 mark. For S-Log 3, where that hits is roughly around about 40%. And so that is probably just around that midpoint. So overexposing by a stop or 2 is not too...
I think if you follow the expose to the right that a lot of people talk about, you're probably not going to go wrong. So I think just getting correct exposure by using an exposure chart or a gray card or something like that. That's going to just work out perfect for you. But
exactly. I think if you would expose to a gray card, then you, especially in S-Log 3, you're really going to maximize the 15 stops dynamic range out of the camera. And that's the gray card with the camera built in. It'll do it, but it's around about that 40% value is what you want to hit.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for us. Thank you very much for everyone for tuning in. We went through a lot, and we hope you grabbed a lot out of this, and you're just as excited for the 7S3 as we are. We can't wait to see all the footage and photos and videos that's going to come out from this camera and what it's capable of doing. So thank you very much. This isn't the last and only time for you to ask any questions. If you do have any more questions, please shoot them through to the same email that we had up through socials and through our emails. Otherwise, we might leave it at that. Thank you again, Heath, for your time tonight. Thanks everyone at home, and we'll see you next time. See you.
See you. Bye.